Welcome to the Wardlaw Mausoleum. I'm going to give you a short description of Fraser history in association to this area. And to do that, to go back to the very beginning of our first records of what we believe the Frasers, that's the time of 1066 and the invasion of William the Conqueror. Now, William the Conqueror came across with his Norman knights, and with him were men called de Fresel, and many people believe that this is where the Fraser name originated from. The Norman knights came into Britain, and they eventually made their way north. Now, at the time of the King of Scots, known as William the Lion, he was encouraging or granting lands to Norman nobles in Scotland to help police it. At that time, the north of Scotland was still under the control of the Vikings, and he was granting the land, hoping that those Norman lords would police the area and eventually push the Vikings out. This is at the time when the Frasers came north. We know that 3 Fraser brothers came north. The oldest of the brothers eventually went to Aberdeenshire, and 2 of the brothers stayed in the Beaulieu-Inverness area. They eventually intermarried with the biggest and most powerful of the Norman families in this area, known as the Bissets. Now, the Bissets are the people that built Beaulieu Priory. And through marriage, the Frasers would eventually be granted the land. And from that point on, the Frasers would continue to expand. Now, there's lots of different points through Scottish and British history in which the Frasers play a very important part. And I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about a few of them. The first period I'm going to talk about is the Scottish Wars of Independence. At this time, there's a Fraser man, Simon Fraser, known as Simon the Patriot. Simon the Patriot fights alongside William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. Now, Simon the Patriot is also associated with the Fraser clan coat of arms. And in fact, the coat of arms at the very top there, you can see, is cut into 4. 2 of the shields, or 2 of the parts of the coat of arms, are blue with 3 white cinquefoils, which are the strawberry flowers, part of the origination, or the original part of the Fraser name. The other 2 are white with 3 red crowns, and it believes that these 3 red crowns are associated with Simon the Patriot. At the Battle of Methven, Robert the Bruce's life was under threat 3 separate times, and those 3 separate times Simon the Fraser, or Simon the Patriot, protected him and saved him. As a result, Robert the Bruce granted those 3 crowns in remembrance of those times. And that's where the coat of arms come from. Now, Simon the Patriot would defeat the English in 3 separate occasions, but he'd eventually be captured, taken south to London, and he would face the same trial and the same punishment as William Wallace, eventually being hung, drawn, and quartered, and his head being placed on display on Tower Bridge. Now, from there we jump forward to the time of Joan of Arc. We know that there's Scots fighting in the French army, and we know a large contingent of Fraser men cross the English Channel to fight for the French, and they're present at the Siege of Orleans and many other of Joan of Arc's battles and her campaign. Jump forward a little bit further to the War of the Roses. Now, there's a connection between 2 families in the War of the Roses, a large family of the Beaufort family in England and also the Frasers in Scotland. In fact, the castle that the Frasers live in is still called Beaufort Castle. We know that Fraser men went south and joined the Lancastrian army, and they were actually present at the Battle of Tewkesbury. Later on, the Frasers would be present under Beryl Stewart at the Battle of Bosworth and would play a pivotal part in that battle itself. We jump forward again to the Flodden campaign. This is the time when James IV invaded northern England with Scotland's largest and most powerful army. Sadly, they'd be defeated at the Battle of Flodden. Now, standing alongside James IV was Hugh Fraser, the chief of the Frasers, and 80 Fraser men. They were all members of the king's retainers and fought alongside him. At the end of the day, only 6 Frasers were left standing, and Hugh Fraser would be mortally wounded. He would return back to his lands in the Beaulieu area, and he'd sadly die within a couple of weeks, and it's believed he's buried just on the other side of the wall there. From that point, we're going to jump forward to the Jacobite era, because the Frasers played a large part in the Jacobite Wars. First of all, the first Jacobite rising was that of 1689. It's probably a good point to tell you what a Jacobite is. A Jacobite is a follower of the royal house of Stuart. The Stuarts were opposed in 1689, and they'd make several attempts over the next 60 years to try and reclaim the throne. The first attempt was in 1689, and it was led by Bonnie Dundee, or to his enemies, he was known as Bloody Clavers. Although Lord Lovat did not support the Jacobites, a group of his men did, and they marched south and joined the Jacobites at the Battle of Killiecrankie, which was a victory. Because of this victory, the Lord Lovat decided to throw his lot in with the Jacobites, and he would be present at a battle called the Battle of Cromdale in 1690, in which the Jacobites would be defeated. Jumping forward again, we get to the time of the second Jacobite rising, which is 1715. By this time, Simon Fraser, the Old Fox, is the clan chief, but he himself does not come out as a Jacobite. In fact, he supports the British government. At that time, Inverness Castle is in the hands of the Jacobites, and Lord Lovat marches out with Fraser men to try and take the castle and the town back from them. While in this attempt, some MacDonald of Keppoch men decide to relieve the Jacobites in the castle, but the Fraser men manage to face them down and chase them off. For his part in the 1715 Jacobite Rising, Lord Lovat will be rewarded by the British government. We jump again once more to 1745. At this point, we have the arrival of Bonnie Prince Charlie making an attempt to reclaim the throne of his ancestors. Now, Lord Lovat himself does not come out in support of the Jacobites, or he doesn't march for the Jacobites, because he's a man in his 70s by this point, but he sends his son, the Master of Lovat. Master of Lovat is not really a die-hard Jacobite, but he follows the wishes of his father. The Fraser men take part in the campaign, but they are not present at the Battle of Culloden, or the Master of Lovat and the Lovat men are not present at the Battle of Culloden. There are Frasers under Fraser of Inverality at the battle. Now, Master of Lovat is in the Bewley area trying to raise men at the time of the battle, and he doesn't make it back to Drumossie Moor to take part. Eventually, he is taken prisoner and he's sent south to Edinburgh. Lord Lovat himself goes in hiding on the west coast and is eventually found on the island in the middle of Loch Moura. He's taken prisoner with the intention of taking him to Edinburgh Castle to join his son. Now, as I mentioned at this point, he's an elderly man and he couldn't travel on horseback, and they didn't want to take him by carriage. So they created a wicker basket that he could sit in that would be suspended between two horses. And at the front of the wicker basket are curtains so he could have a little bit of privacy. It was initially believed it would take 3 days to get him from Inverness down to Edinburgh Castle, but Lord Lovat had a different plan. He wanted to talk to every single person that he met along that road. So instead of taking 3 days, many people believe it took 3 weeks. And there's a story associated with the travels that's quite funny. Because he was a famous man, he was the famous Old Fox and he was the famous Old Jacobite, many people just wanted to catch a glimpse of him. One of these people was a British officer. His plan was to walk up to the wicker basket, throw open the curtains and get his glimpse of the old rebel. Lord Lovat heard him coming, and when the curtains were thrown open, Lord Lovat simply leaned forward and bit him on the nose and found this greatly entertaining. Eventually, Lord Lovat was imprisoned in Edinburgh Castle in the room next to his son, but he'd never be granted permission to see his son again. He'd eventually be sent south to London, to the Tower of London, where he would stand trial, and he'd be found guilty and sentenced to be beheaded. He'd be taken to the place of execution in April 1747, where there would be thousands of people ready to watch him die. There were stands made specifically for the entertainment, and as he was leaning on the block, one of the stands collapsed, killing, they say, up to 20 people. Lord Lovat found this greatly entertaining. In fact, many people believe the saying, "laughing your head off," comes from Lord Lovat, because he said he laughed so heartily before his head was removed from his shoulders. Now, his head and his body were placed in a coffin, and tradition says he was buried in the Tower of London, but we know slightly differently. In fact, he's buried just inside the mausoleum here, his body being brought back from the tower and being placed with his ancestors. Now, the Master of Lovat would eventually be released, and rather than continuing to fight against the British government, he would join them. He would form regiments for service in the British Army. The first regiment was the 78th Fraser Highlanders. They would see active service in North America, specifically at the Siege of Quebec and the Plains of Abraham, the Frasers and the Master of Lovat playing a pivotal part in that battle. During the American Wars of Independence, he would also raise a regiment, the 71st Fraser Highlanders, and 2,300 men would serve during that campaign. Eventually, he was forgiven of his past transgressions, and he'd be granted back his lands for service to the Crown, gaining the lands of Bewley and the Beaufort Castle once more. After that, the Fraser men and the Lord Lovats would play a very important part in the British Army, and they would continue to do so. First of all, with the formation of the Lovat Scouts, seeing action in South Africa in the Boer Wars and the First World War. And then in the Second World War, we have Lord Lovat landing on the beaches of D-Day with the commando regiments. Now, that's about 1,000 years of Fraser history condensed into just a couple of minutes.